Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining these discussions, and especially I started this Abhidhamma discussions as a part of Dhammapariyesanā discussion series, and 2 weeks ago I gave an introduction about the whole Abhidhamma, and last Wednesday I talked about akusala chittas, which means there are akusala chittas. We talked about 8 loba chittas and 2 dosa chittas, 2 moha chittas. So there are 12 akusala chittas. And what is scheduled for today is Ahetuka chittas, rootless consciousness. So states of consciousness. So now the first question one may ask is, what is Ahetuka chitta? There are 18. And what is the use of Ahetuka chitta? Let me answer you. Ahetuka chitta means, it basically means rootless. There are no strong roots involved with any of the akusala chittas, states of, Ahetuka chittas. Now in the akusala chittas, there are strong akusala roots involved for the akusala chittas. For example, lobha, dosa, and moha. When it comes to Ahetuka, it is rootless because there is no alobha, there is no lobha, dosa, moha, as well as there is no alobha, adosa, moha roots involved with any of the Ahetuka thoughts, Ahetuka chittas. I would say chittas, not thoughts. So states of consciousness. And the other thing is, what is the use of Ahetuka chittas? Okay, the use of Ahetuka chittas appear to me in 2 ways. The first is the kind of patisandhi chitta, the rebirth consciousness with we were born, associates an Ahetuka chitta or a Sahetuka chitta. So how can that happen? For example, I would say all the humans, they are born with a patisandhi chitta with Sahetuka or Ahetuka kusala chitta. Now, for example, I would say people who are born with difficulties. I mean, I'm not trying to say everything is a consequence of, is an outcome of the past karmas, but patisandhi chitta affects us, especially the sort of kind of karma that causes us to be reborn in the next life, and as we see in this life too. So the sort of karma that causes us to be born, that karma is identified with a patisandhi chitta. Let's say you were born with some difficulties, some mental physical difficulties. It could be a patisandhi chitta with Ahetuka kusala element. That means you have a kusala, but which is Ahetuka. That means your kusala that you were born with is not very powerful, which is not very strong. On the other hand, people who are so much comfortable in their human life, they are supposed to be born in a life, next life or this life, with a kusala chitta, which is Sahetuka. So now you can see Ahetuka, Sahetuka matters to us in one perspective, that is in terms of our birth. Second is the cognitive process that happens before the sensory consciousnesses arise. Now we know chakku, chakku vinyana, sota vinyana, ghana vinyana, jivha vinyana, kaya vinyana, manu vinyana. They all arise as a result of many other previous, conditional things. But we always talk about vinyanas and the rest after that. But if you take a closer look at what happens before sensory consciousnesses arise, you can see there is an impressionistic process that happens before the particular respective sensory vinyana, which you call chakku, sota, ghana, jivha, kaya vinyanas, arise. That is where we have to understand ahetuka chittas. So because they are not arisen before the sensory consciousnesses, they can be rootless. Now, for instance, I would say at a later part of your cognitive process, you may make kamma. We will be talking chitta, vithi, and all that. That happens after sensory consciousnesses, means chakku, sota, ghana, jivha, kaya vinyanas, arose. But before that, there are no elements to kusala and akusala. I mean, you won't have sensory consciousnesses without a process, but people don't know that process. That process is called ahetuka, because that process has no roots, no lobha dosa moha or alobha dosa moha, because you are constructing kusala and akusala roots into the sensory consciousness types after the process becomes sensory, after the consciousness becomes developed with other things such as sampatichana and santirana, which arise after vinyanas arise. So before sensory consciousness types arise, the sort of process is called ahetuka. Now let's take a look at what is ahetuka and the rest of the things, the contents and all that. So now I think you know what is ahetuka, which means rootless. In any of the ahetuka chittas, there are no stronger roots like lobha dosa moha or alobha dosa moha involved. And the other thing is the use of ahetuka chittas. It's twofold. One is the patisandhi chitta. What kind of patisandhi chitta you had when you were born? It could be a patisandhi chitta with a kusala, but definitely it's a kusala. You couldn't have been born as a human if you didn't have a kusala, but that kusala chitta normally associates a sahetuka element or a ahetuka element. In that we could be different. That's when we understand the differences, those manifesting things in our life. Those different things, kamma, in one sense. So in order to understand that, we need to know what is ahetuka, what is sahetuka. Ahetuka means rootless, nature. That means when you were born, your patisandhi chitta didn't have specific strong roots like alobha dosa moha or lobha dosa moha. But when you were lucky enough to have a patisandhi chitta with kusala roots, sahetuka, then you are definitely reborn in a better place. But I couldn't tell you that thing. If you were born with a ahetuka akusala, you were definitely not reborn. Couldn't have been reborn as a human. You could have been definitely born as a being in the apayas. So those beings who were reborn as beings in the apaya worlds, they had a patisandhi chitta with a ahetuka akusala vipaka thought, right? Okay. On the second the most important use of ahetuka is the process before a cognitive a process becomes a sensory consciousness. So that part is called Ahetuka part because that has no elements like Loba Dosa Moha or Alopa Adosa. Let's take a look at Ahetuka Chittas in details. I want to tell you that I'm trying to teach you as simple as I can, and I think this is very simple, but I think you need a sort of a technical knowledge at some point because I'm using Pali words to show you that these are the real names of these cognitive elements. So please keep that in mind. Other than that, don't worry about anything. Okay, let's take a look at the slides that I prepared for you. Okay, let me see. Okay, rootless consciousness. That means Kama Avachara Ahetuka Chittas. Because Ahetuka Chittas appear only in the Kama Avachara. So basically, the sort of Ahetuka Chittas that we talk about now, 18 Ahetuka Chittas. Okay, now this clearly, says what is a rootless chitta. Neither the wholesome kusala roots, nor do they have the unwholesome akusala roots. And there is a third category under Ahetuka, the chittas which are merely functional, which are called kiriya chittas. So when you talk about Ahetuka chittas, they are threefold. The first one is Ahetuka akusala. The second one is Ahetuka kusala. Third one is kiriya. But basically, Ahetuka kusala or Ahetuka akusala or Ahetuka kiriya do not associate any roots like we see in the akusala chittas and also in the forthcoming lesson about the kusala chittas. So this is rootless. Because it is rootless, because the Ahetuka chittas are rootless, they are very weaker than kusala and akusala chittas. That we only talk about akusala chittas. We will be talking kusala chittas in the forthcoming lesson. So compared to those two, these Ahetuka chittas are weaker because they don't have a root. We call the root to be hetu. Now you can see here it's devoid of concomitant hetus. That means there are no concomitant hetus like main roots. Hetu means root. But you have to keep in mind, according to the Buddhism, and with this great teaching called Paticca you can't say anything is arisen without a cause. That's why it is said that there is a nibbattaka hetus. There is no sampayuttaka hetu, right? That means there is no concomitant, there is no main root, but there is an efficient cause, not devoid of an efficient cause. That means there are subordinate hetus, but because they are not very manifested, we can't say this as a root. But keep that in mind, otherwise people might be puzzled why these Ahetukas do not have any kind of cause, any kind of root. It has kind of an efficient cause, but it has no concomitant cause like in the akusala chittas we talked last week, giving the number of 12, and the kusala chittas we will be talking in a forthcoming lesson. Okay, classification of Ahetuka chittas. Okay, so how do we classify Ahetuka chittas? Oh, as I told you, out of 18 Ahetuka chittas, rootless chittas, 15 is vipaka. That means these 15, they mostly come from the karma that we were born with. So, that has the influence each time when we having one of these akusala vipaka, Ahetuka akusala vipaka chitta or Ahetuka kusala vipaka chitta. But don't worry about it. there is a place where we can change, you know, these impulsive things of the thought, the chittas. But some people might think, oh, if it is all coming, then we can change, these akusala side. Kusala side, we don't worry. No, you can change. I will tell you how to do it. But for the moment, just to keep in mind, out of 18 Ahetuka chittas, 15 is vipaka. They are broken into two sides, two aspects. 7 akusalas, 7 kusala, 8 kusalas. So 7 akusala Ahetuka akusala vipaka chittas and 8 Ahetuka kusala vipaka chittas. But you may wonder why it has the vipaka. Vipaka means this is an outcome of a previous karma. So that means most of the influential nature of any of these 15 vipaka chittas come from an outcome to a previous karma. But don't worry, we can change them. But there's an influence. We have to be careful. Okay, there are 3 kiriya chittas. Kiriya chittas are functional chittas. They don't arise because of a karma. Now in here you see these 15, they arise because of a karma. But these 3 do not arise because of a karma. They are just functional chittas. Actually, they are really interesting. I mean, if you take a look at of these 15 compared to these 15, these are really interesting. Where we understand, we can change even this influential nature of Ahetuka vipaka. 15 Ahetuka vipaka karmas too. Okay, you have to understand this with the rest of the slide. Okay. Now you know there are 15 vipaka chittas. Out of the 15 vipaka chittas, the seven vipaka chittas, they fall into akusala. Akusala Ahetuka vipaka chittas. You can see there are 7. How do we understand these 7? Upekka sahagata. Now you can see 4 vinyanas have appeared in the list: Chakku, Sota, Gana, Jivha, Kaya, because I'm trying to make you learn faster, make you learn easier. Now that means vipaka chittas. If you go to the next slide, which has the kusala vipaka chittas, you can see the same vinyanas. Now, if you can take a look at of the nature of how they are given in the akusala and kusala vipaka chittas, you can see other compared to the panchadvara vajjana and manodvara vajjana in the kiriya chitta, akusala ahetuka or kusala ahetuka chittas talk about a point or a level of cognitive process after it becomes a vijnana. Now, if you take a look at of the 2 kiriya chittas, except Hasitupada, which is peculiar to the arahants and the Buddhas, Pacceka Buddhas and Sambuddhas. This is where our cognitive process becomes a vijnana. So prior to our cognitive process becomes a vijnana, there is a certain process. That process is not given in either of these akusala or kusala vipaka chittas. So you have to keep in mind that akusala ahetuka akusala vipaka chittas and kusala ahetuka kusala vipaka chittas, they talk about a cognitive process where a cognitive process already ended up with a consciousness. But before it ended up with it won't end up with a consciousness. It has to go further, as we say in a chitta vithi. But before our cognitive process ends up with a vijnana at a certain point, there is a lot of there are a lot of things happening before that stage. That is what we call Panchadvara Vajjana and Manodvara Vajjana. But here, I also think that we have to sort of study Panchadvara Vajjana and Manodvara Vajjana before we talk about Ahetuka Kusala or Ahetuka Kusala. But anyways, because this is given in the first place in the Abhidhamma, so let's study this first. These two first, Akusala and Kusala side of the Ahetuka. Now, this clearly means when we, act upon things in our normal daily life, we come up with vijnanas with upekka. Now, if you take a look at of the kusala side of the vipaka chittas, you can see the same vijnanas. They correspond, each other. But there is a small difference. The fifth vijnana, which is called kaya vijnana, has sukha sahagata in the kusala vipaka chitta. But here it is dukkha. Other than that, these five are the same. They correspond each other in both Ahetuka Kusala and Akusala. Now, that means every time we come up with a consciousness, either in the Kusala or Akusala, our vijnanas, our feeling is neutral, upekka. So whenever we have a vijnana, sensory vijnana, we call sensory consciousness, our feeling is neither somanasa or domanasa, but neutral, is with equanimity. I would say neutral. But in here, kaya vijnana, which comes under akusala, it is a dukkha, because you experiencing a kaya vijnana, which is unhappy, because you get this kaya vijnana from a previous akusala, right? That's why it is not upekka but dukkha. In the somanasa side, in the kusala side also, you can see it is not dukkha, it is sukha, it is not upekka. And then there are two other levels where the vijnana goes. They are vijnana moves, upekka sahagata sampatichana and santirana. It is also neutral. But what is sampatichana and santirana? Okay, let me explain to you. Sampatichana means whenever you have a sensory consciousness, indriya, I would say indriya vijnana, then what happens? That indriya vijnana or sensory consciousness has to go through another few levels. The first level is sampatichana. Sampatichana means that vijnana is being received by another thought, another chitta, that is called sampatichana. That means every time you have an indriya vijnana, means chakku sota gana jiva kaya, it is followed by sampatichana chitta. It has to be received. I mean, indriya vijnana is just a chitta, but it has to be received. Now, when you do some printing work, you can see when you know that this is what you want to print out, then there is a consciousness, right? And then what happens? You have to send it to the computer. Printer. When you see the display of the printer, you can see receiving. Okay, that means the message has to be received. So sampatichana means after you have indriya vijnana, chakku sota gana jiva, whatever vijnana, kaya vijnana, you will have to face sampatichana chitta. That means in the sampatichana chitta, the chakku vijnana, sota vijnana, gana vijnana, jivha vijnana, kaya vijnana, all they have to be received differently. Now, I don't think that you will get all the vijnanas at the same time at this point. But let's say if you take one vijnana, chakku vijnana, it has to be received by another chitta, which is called sampatichana. That is what we see here. And then immediately after it is received, it will go away, and then another chitta arises, that is called santirana, wherein which we know that particular chitta that was arisen as a Indriya Vijnana, which you call sensory consciousness, and then it was received by some Paticchana chitta, and then after it goes away, passes away, there is an investigating chitta. That means that particular chitta has to be investigated. But please keep in mind, the object is going to be the same. Now, the object is being taken at the five sense door. Let's say rupa to chakku, sota to saddha to sota, and gandha to ghana, rasa to jivha, and then pottambha to kaya, and all the sort of object, sensory object that you take in the first place will be going through up until the santiran. It won't be changed, but just the type of processing levels will appear in the same way. Okay, now let's take a look at this particular area, Dvipancha Vijnana. Now, Abhidhammic teachers say that these five, Upekkha-sahagata Chakku Vijnana, Upekkha-sahagata Sota Vijnana, Upekkha-sahagata Ghana Vijnana, Upekkha-sahagata Jivha Vijnana, and Dukkha-sahagata Kaya, they all have the similar names with Indriya Vijnanas, that means sensory consciousnesses. They all take the respective sensory objects. Now, for example, I would say when a sensory object, that means when a sensory object impinges on a sensory faculty. Now, for example, I would say when a rupa impinges on the chakku, then what happens is there is a chitta which arises in the chakku. That is what we call panchadvara, in the panchadvara vajjana chitta, right? That means your chakku is sensitive to that particular pasada, that which you call the sensitive matter of the sensory object. Let me tell you again. Now, when a sensory object, for instance, I would say, let's take rupa. When your rupa impinges on the sensory faculty, which you call chakku, then what happens? Immediately, there is a chitta, consciousness arises in your chakku. That is not chakku vijnana. That is something else. Chakku vijnana still has to come. The chitta that arises immediately when the sensory object impinges on your particular sense faculty, in this case chakku, we call it panchadvara vajjana. Because in this panchadvara vajjana, what happens is the particular chitta, apprehends the particular sense object. We call it a pasada. Pasada is a sensitive matter. That means every time, whenever your particular sense organs apprehends the sensory objects, then what happens means your sensory sense faculties, they become very sensitive. That is what happens to us all the time. Our faculties, sense faculty, indriyas, are sensitive to the sense objects through this pasada format. Pasada means sensitive matter of that particular thing, particular object. Okay. Now, still there is no Indriya Vijnana, but before Indriya Vijnana arises, there is what we call Panchadvara Vajjana Chitta arises, which we will be discussing after. See in here. Okay, that's what we call it. These five of the both Ahetuka Akusala Vipaka Chitta and Ahetuka Kusala Vipaka Chitta, these five they are being taken as Vipancha Vijnana, 2 sets of fivefold sense consciousness, because of that Panchadvara Vajjana theory. Okay, let me see the rest. I'm going to make the slide bigger. Okay. Okay, Kusala Ahetuka Vipaka Chitta. It has to be 8. There was a small mistake here. I'm going to make it edited. To be 8. Let me go again. Okay, Kusala Ahetuka Vipaka Chitta, there are 8. You can see the 8. There's a small difference, and you can see the first 4 Vijnanas, they are same compared to the Ahetuka Kusala Vipaka Chittas. But in the 5th one, as I told you at the beginning, the dukkha has become sukha here, because you get this sukha kaya vijnana with the sukha perspective, because this happens because of a kusala vipaka. But then you can see upekka sagata sampatichana. That means after you have the indriya vijnana, it will go into sampatichana. That means receiving. There will be another chitta called receiving consciousness. But after that, Dhamma friends, you can see there are 2 santirana. Now, we could only see upekka sahagata santirana in the akusala chitta, but why there is a somanasa sahagata santirana too? I told you santirana means investigating consciousness. So once you have, let me tell you again, once you have the sensory consciousnesses, indriya vijnana, you will have a sampatichana. That means they will go. So the indriya vijnana will pass away, and then there will be sampatichana vijnana. That means receiving consciousness, and it will also pass away, and there will be then investigating consciousness, which you call santirana. But santirana part, investigating part, is twofold in the kusala vipaka chitta. Why is it? Because there is a somanasa, there is a happiness which associates with santirana in the kusala part of the ahetuka. Also neutral. So it's not a very big thing, but you have to keep in mind, this could be an issue to some people, because if they don't have a patisandhi chitta with a kusala, with a sahetuka kusala, because when you have this sahetuka kusala thing, you will have this somanasa. It's what we can see in the kusala vipaka chittas. There are 8 kusala vipaka chittas according to this. Let me go again. So once again, I want to tell you the use of ahetuka akusala vipaka chitta or kusala vipaka chitta appear to us in a way how we perceive, how we understand. Don't take the perception. How we understand what happens to our consciousnesses before they become consciousness, right? Is what we call Panchadvara Vajjana. But in here we know these vijnanas, they arise. But once the vijnanas arise, there is sampatichana, santirana. But before vijnanas arise, we know Panchadvara Vajjana. That's what we have to know. So the correct way to understand the Ahetuka Chittas is understanding Panchadvara Vajjana, Manodvara Vajjana Chittas, and then the Ahetuka Kusala Chitta and Ahetuka Kusala Chitta. That's how we have to understand, but we have to go the way how it was given in the Abhidhamma. And you can see again, these 5 have been given as the Pancha Vijnana, because these 5 correspond to the Ahetuka, Akusala Ahetuka Vipaka Chittas too. Okay. Kriya Chittas. These are just merely functional Chittas. Okay, so there are 3 Kriya Chittas. The first one is Upekka Sahagata, Panchadvara Vajjana, but the second one has no Upekka, Somanasa, Domanasa, anything. It is just Manodvara Vajjana and Hasatupada Chitta. I don't think this has an issue to us, It is only experienced by the Buddhas, Pacceka Buddhas, arahants. But Panchatvara Vajna is a big deal, folks, because I'm telling you, the reason is, you can see these 5 vinyanas. Before these 5 vinyanas arise on the akusala side, before these 5 vinyanas arise on the kusala side, what is happening is Panchadvara Vajjana or Manodvara Vajjana. So you have to keep that in mind. Why Panchadvara Vajjana is only experiencing by those who are not arahants? Because arahants, they have a functional perspective about the consciousness types happen before sensory perceptions. They don't attach to any of these objects. So what is basically Panchadvara Vajjana? Now I'm going to tell you, as I told you, this is what happens before our cognitive process becomes a sensory perception. When a sense object impinges on a sense faculty at one of the 5 sense doors, visible form on the eye, first there arises a chitta, adverting, which you call avajjana, to the object. Immediately after this, eye consciousness arises. Eye consciousness, so I would say ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness. Any of these before any of these consciousnesses arise, there is Panchadvara Vajjana. That's what we call when a sense object, that means let's say Rupa, impinges on a sense faculty, Chakku, at one of the 5 sense doors. 5 sense doors, Chakkusudakana Divakaya. Example, visible form on the eye. First, there arises a chitta adverting to that particular Rupa. But this chitta is not eye consciousness before it becomes eye consciousness. Becomes an eye consciousness. Immediately after this eye consciousness arises, seeing that form, then what happens? There is a single mind moment. This act of seeing lasts only for a single mind, chittakana. Immediately thereafter arises a chitta which apprehends or receives the object that had been seen, cognized by eye consciousness. That means after eye consciousness or sensory consciousness, there is this sampatichana chitta arises. After sampatichana chitta arises, it will also stay for a moment and it will also pass away. Then there is another chitta arises which we call santirana. Okay, so this is what happens. Now you understand Panchadvara Vajjana means the chitta which arises before Indriya Vinyanas, which is pretty clear to all of us. Why it has been taken here? Because it is just a functional thing. That's why it is taken here. Then what is Manodvara Vajjana? Okay, that's very interesting. Manodvara Vajjana is a chitta that is adverting to the mind. Now, it has 2 aspects. The first aspect is when your mind goes on a cognitive process starting from the Indriya, Indriya, then Panchadvara Vajjana Vijnana, Indriya Vijnana, Sampatichana Vijnana, and then Santirana Vijnana. Let's go back again. How does the cognitive process start? Indriya, what do you call the Panchadvara Vajjana Vijnana or chitta, and then Indriya Vijnana, Sampatichana, Santirana, right? In the chitta vithi, we know there are a few other things preceded by bhavanga chittas too, but I will tell you why, how it happens. But Panchadvara Vajjana does not recognize anything. It is just doing a mere functional nature about the cognitive process. One knows what exactly it is at the level of sensory consciousness, Indriya Vijnana. Before Indriya Vijnana, those Panchadvara Vajjana chittas never know what it is. I would say, it doesn't understand anything. It is just a functional thing happens between the sense faculty and the sense object. Let's go back. So Manodwara Vajjana has two parts. The first part is a kind of a level in the cognitive process. What is that level in the cognitive process? I would tell you. In order to understand that, we have to go further here. Let me see. See that. Oh, we have to understand chitta vithi in order to understand the two aspects of Manodwara Vajjana. Now, folks, can you see? Oh, can you see? This is where we call Panchadwara Vajjana. That's the fourth thought moment, Chittakana, where your consciousness has not still become a Vijnana. This is where we call it Vijnana, the fifth moment. So this is still we call five sense door adverting Panchadwara Vajjana. See, it starts from the Bhavanga Chitta, right? Three Bhavanga Chittas, and then Panchadwara Vajjana, and then Indriya Vijnanas rise. Then you can see Sampatichana, right? And Santirana, receiving consciousness and investigating consciousness. See this part, Vattapana. This is what we call Manodwara, one of the roles of Manodwara. Vattapana is determining consciousness. That means one of the roles of Manodwara Vajjana. So one of the roles of Manodwara Vajjana is to bring the Santirana level of your cognitive process higher, moves higher. That is to Vattapana state. In the Vattapana state, what you can see is your consciousness is being determined. Some people say this is kind of a discriminatory level of your consciousness. And then what happens? It will go through javanas. You can see that. It will go through 7 javanas. And then there is a thought registered at the 16 and 17 moments, chittakanas of your love. So now you understand Manodwara Vajjana, which is a functional chitta, has two parts. The first part is a stage of the cognitive process where we know a chitta vithi, which has 17 chittakanas. The second aspect of the Manodwara Vajjana means, folks, when a thought directly adverts to the mind, but sometimes, we take thoughts without seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling. We take some object directly, which you call Dhamma, right? When a sense object pertain to the mind directly impinges on the mind, that is also called Manodwara Vajjana, right? So there are two parts. Now, in other words, I would say, when a thought impinges on the mind, then what happens? Directly, there is this Manodwara Vajjana arises. And Hasitupada is interesting. Hasitupada means the smile, Kamavachara type, sensory type of smile of the Buddhas, Pacceka Buddhas, and Arahants. And I have something to tell you here. Let me just show you that thing. Let me see that here. We can see now. Okay. Now this is these are two explanatory things that I have put it here. You can see two aspects of Manodwara Vajjana can arise in a cognitive process occurring at the 5 sense door, and it will cover Vattapana stage, and can arise in a process occurring at the mind door. So Manodwara has two parts. But I want to tell you what is special with the Hasitupada. Arahants may smile with one of the 5 chittas. The four beautiful sense sphere functional chittas, because we know there are another type of beautiful kama vachara kriya chittas that we will be studying after this. There are four kusala type of functional kriya chittas, and then this hasatupada chittas. There are 5 ways. There are 5 chittas where arahants will be using to smile. Putujjana, like especially the Kalyana Putujjana, there are 2 Putujjana, Andha and Kalyana. Andha Putujjana means someone who is not viewing everything through 5 aggregates and 12 bases or 18 elements, dhatus, but the one who is always trying to view the whole world through 5 aggregates, 12 ayatanas and 18 dhatus, he or she is called Kalyana Putujjana. Okay, but that kind of a Kalyana Putujjana, I hope all of us laugh with 4 Somanasa Kusala Chittas, and we talked about these 4 Somanasa Kusala Chittas in the previous discussion, and 1 Kusala Chitta. Those are the chittas that we will be using to laugh. Sotapanna, Sakadagami, and Anagami noble individuals, they smile with one of the 2 akusala chittas without wrong view. Dittigata, Vippayutta, which we talked last week. 2 of them, but with right view. I would say with right view without wrong view. With one of the 2 akusala chittas without wrong view, and pleasure, or 1 kusala chitta with pleasure in the kusala side. Arahants and Pacheka Buddhas, they are taken similar, at the same level. They smile with one of the 4 Sobana Kiriya Chittas, which we'll be talking in a previous forthcoming discussion. Because 4 Chittas and this Hasatupada, we just talked about it. 5. They have 5 Kiriya Chittas in regard to smile. What about the Samma Sambuddha, which is pretty interesting? Samma Sambuddha smile with one of the 2 Sobana Kiriya Chittas, which we'll be discussing in a previous discussion. Accompanied by wisdom and pleasure. What does it mean? Samma Sambuddhas don't have Hasitupada, and only Arahants and Pacheka Buddhas have Hasitupada. Okay, Samma Sambuddhas don't have Hasitupada because they have only 2 of the Sobana Kiriya Chittas, which is pretty interesting to Dhamma friends. Now you know what is it, and okay, depending on the time, let's move on to the next part. The next part is about the chitta vithi. Let me go by your present view. Okay, chittas, chitta vithi. Okay, this is pretty interesting, folks. What is this to you? What is a chitta vithi? I will simply explain to you. Dhamma friends, whenever you don't take objects from outside, whenever you don't use your sense faculties, whenever you don't use chakku, sota, gana, jivha, whatever faculties, what happens to you in your cognitive process is, at that point, what happens, what arises, what stays, what passes away is only bhavanga chitta. Whenever you are using your faculties, sense faculties to acquire external objects, then what happens? Bhavanga chitta has to process these external objects. So if you don't, let's say when you are in sleep, you are not taking objects. So what happens is only your bhavanga chitta works. So how do we understand bhavanga chitta in our cognitive process? If you can take a look at of these 3 moments: Atita Bhavanga, Bhavanga Chalana, Bhavanga Upacheda, people call it Bhavanga Upacheda. These are the normal 365 way of your cognitive process. All the time what happens is when an object arises, it goes through Atita Bhavanga, Bhavanga Chalana, Bhavanga Upacheda. Unless you are not taking objects from outside. Whenever you are taking objects from outside, like Rupa, Saddha, Gandha, Rasa, Pottabha, then what happens? Bhavanga has to stop its process just by ending at the third moment. Bhavanga Upachcheda, it has to continue into the Panchadvara Vajjana, Panchavinyana, Sampatichana, Santirana, Bottapana, Javana, Tadaramana, and creates a register a thought. So what automatically naturally happens in your cognitive process is always is only three moments: Atita Bhavanga, Bhavanga Chalana, Bhavanga Upachcheda, or just the Bhavanga Chitta. Bhavanga Chittas arise and then stay and then pass away. But whenever you are opening up for the outside world to get objects, which you call objects, Rupa, Saddha, Gandha, Rasa, Pottabha, and all that, then what happens? Bhavanga Chitta has to continue to another 14 Chittakanas. That's how it happens. Okay. So, what is special in this process? Let me see. Let me read a chitta vithi. Now, let's take Chakku. Now, there are a couple of chitta vithis. Chakku dwara chitta vithi. That means, Ido, chitta vithi based on eye. There's a chitta vithi thought process based on ear that we call Sota dwara vithi, chitta vithi. There's a third dwara called Gana dwara chitta vithi. That means there is a chitta vithi. That means there's a thought process starting from based on smell. And there is a Jivha dwara chitta vithi. That means there is a chitta vithi or thought process which based on tongue. And there is Kaya dwara chitta vithi. There is a chitta vithi which you call thought process which based on the body. And mano dwara, that means based on mind. Let's take one chitta vithi. So there are 6 at this point. So let's take Chakku dwara chitta vithi. What happens? There are 17 moments, thought moments. A Chakku dwara chitta vithi has to exist. Each moment, when each moment arises, it has to stay. It has to pass away. So when the first thought moment passes away, there is the second thought arises. Second thought moment. When the second thought moment passes away, then there is a third thought moment arises. When the third thought moment passes away, there is the fourth chitta arises. The same way, all the moments have to pass away until it will become 17 and then registering a thought. First, let's take a look at the first one. Okay. Atita Bhavanga. What does it mean? A Bhavanga that flows by in a passive state when one of the 5 physical sense organs come in contact with its object. Okay. Now, Atita Bhavanga means a state where the Bhavanga Chitta seems to be very passive, not active. That means when you are maybe asleep, when you are not interested about the outside world, and there we see the Bhavanga Chitta is very passive, not active, inactive that much. Second is a Bhavanga Chitta, that means Bhavanga Chalana, a Bhavanga that vibrates for one thought moment. So whenever you have the Bhavanga Chitta, because these 3 are the contents of the Bhavanga Chitta, they always happen. And then what happens? Because of Atita Bhavanga, because it happens all the time, there is Bhavanga Chalana, by which the particular Bhavanga, Atita Bhavanga, vibrates for one thought moment. And then what happens? There is a passing away of the Bhavanga thought. Then it goes back to Atita Bhavanga. If it is not open for outside, external things for Panchadvara Vajjana. Let's say you are open for the outside Rupa, Saddha, Gandha, Rasa, Pottabha and everything, then it will not pass away and go back to Atita Bhavanga, it will continue. it will continue to Panchadvara Vajana. Okay, let's see. A chitta, what is Panchadvara Vajana? A chitta that turns towards the object through the sense door that has been stimulated. Now adverting, apprehending. Then what happens after that? Panchavinyana, that means the appropriate sense consciousness, in this case Chakku Vinyana, in the case of the eye consciousness arises as a consequence of the Panchadvara Vajana. At the Panchadvara Vajana, there is no particular understanding of what is going to happen. It's just kind of doing apprehending or adverting part, but only at the Panchavinyana level, it particularly understand whether it is a smell, whether it is a rupa, whether it is a object, whether it is an image or a sound or a smell or a taste or whatever. And then what you call Sampatichana. Next, another thought moment, the Sampatichana chitta, which has the function of receiving the object after Panchavinyana. So the chitta that passes away after Chakku Vinyana has to be received, processed by receiving at the level of Sampatichana. Then the seventh thought moment is Santirana. What is Santirana? Santirana means when the object has been received, another thought moment called Santirana chitta. That means when the Sampatichana passes away, that thought passes away, Santirana arises. When that Santirana arises, what happens is it performs the function of investigates the thought that came from Sampatichana. And then what happens? Vottapana. Now, I told you at the beginning, Vottapana is a part of Manodvara Vajana. What is the role of Vottapana? Is to particularly discriminate of the investigating chitta, which passed away before Vottapana, right? It determines the consciousness, which came as a consequence of Santirana. And you remember, in the Kusala Chitta Vipaka, Ahetuka Kusala Vipaka Chitta, the Santirana could be twofold, Upekka and Somanasa. But in the Akusala one, it's only Upekka, depending on the previous karma. Now, folks, we are coming to the very important part of this discussion. That is Javana. Now, Javana is where you can change the karma. Now, up until Vottapana, there is no intention. You have no intention. You can't say that there's a karma producing. But only at the 9 to 15 thought moments, which you call chittakanas, where we call these are impulsive stages, Javana stages, there is the element you can add with intention. That means you are inquiring whether this is a good karma or bad karma, kusala, akusala. That means the free will manifest in here, in the Javana states, 7 Javana states. Javana means impulsive states, what to do, what thing should I execute here? Should I do a kusala? Should I do a akusala? I mean, that is what we call free will, right? So the only place where you can change the akusala, ahetuka akusala, ahetuka kusala is this place. You can change by using yoniso manasikara, vipassana, panya, all that akusala vipaka and kusala vipaka, you can increase the kusala side. So Javana means the stage where your thought moment is creating karma. Javana is the karma stage. That means it won't construct karma on its own. It will create karma based on how you think, how you want to make it happen. Okay, so you have a better place, you have the best place to change your good karma at this point, 9 to 15. That's why it takes 7 moments, right? 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. It takes 7 chittakanas, because it is naturally allowing you to make a decision. Hey, make a decision. Come to a decision. The decision is what at this point is try to use yoniso manasikara and convert it to a kusala thing. Be that come from a kusala part, but you are trying to make it to kusala, so that you are winning, you are defeating the akusala side at the level of Javana. And then what happens? I would read something for you. Javana, 9 to 15, right? The object having been determined, the most important stage from an ethical standpoint follows. That means the Kamma stage in this Javana. This stage, called Javana, consists of 7 consecutive thought moments, all having an identical nature. It is at this stage that good or evil is done, depending on whether the chittas have wholesome or unwholesome roots. Therefore, these Javana thoughts moments have roots and also produce new karma. So that's very interesting, folks. So you have to make the most at this point by using Javana to transform your akusala side into kusala side. 16, 17, the last 2 moments, chittakanas, following the 7 Javana, the 15 one, the registering stage occurs. Now, that after you deciding through your free will and through yoniso manasikara what to do with the incoming thought, let's say you deciding it to be wholesome, as we always encourage you, then what happens? Registering the thought, this is going to be registered. This particular thought is going to be registered. How it is going to be registered? Following the 7 Javana, the registering stage occurs. See here, composed of 2 thoughts moments called Pada Lambana, but I put it Pada Arambana. They both are correct. Alambana, Arambana. That means object. When the second registering chitta has perished, that means the 17 one, 16 arises, stay, and then pass away. 17 arises, stay, pass away. And then once the 17 moment passes away, perish, the bhavanga follows, flowing on until interrupted by another thought process. Then what happens? Once it creates through this chitta, chakudara, chitta within here, then what happens? It goes back to bhavanga again. Then bhavanga again looks at, do I get another outside external object? If not, I only operate until 3 moments. 3 chittakanas. That means bhavanga, atita bhavanga, chalana upachit. That's it. Go back to bhavanga, atita bhavanga, chalana upachit. Atita bhavanga, chalana upachit. If the bhavanga chitta, gets receives outside objects, then what happens? It will not go back to atita bhavanga right fast. It will continue with panchadvara vajjana, panchavinyana, manadavinyana, I would say, sampatichana, santirana, vottapana, javana, tadaramana, utadalamana, and then back again to bhavanga chitta. Pretty interesting. So when you are not keeping up with the outside external factors, your cognitive process only works with bhavanga chitta, only for those 3 moments. If it is open for the outside world, it will go through 17 moments. Okay, so that's interesting. And I want to say, every moment, every thought moment, like you can see 17 chittakanas or 3 chittakanas, which happens all the time. All these chittakanas are intrinsic with 3 things. Uppada, Titi, Bhanga. Uppado Panyayati, Vayo Panyayati, Chittas Anjatam Panyayati. That means the nature of all the sankatas. So none of the thought moment will stay longer. It has to rise, stay, pass away, and there's another thought moment rise. Same thing that happens to all the sankatas. Okay, so folks, today, now you understood all these Ahetuka chittas and how we need to understand Ahetuka chittas in an easy, simplified way. So I'm going to do kind of an interesting thing now. I'm going to play this presentation with an automatic, player. You can see what we've been doing before, after that. Let me see. Let's go back. I want you see something here. Okay, let me play this. Okay, see what's going on. Chitta. Okay, sorry. We had to go back. We had to go back. We had to go to the beginning. Okay, let's see what's happening now. Okay, it's gonna be starting. Rootless Consciousness-18. That means, let me see again here. Yeah, 18 Ahetuka chittas, and we talked about Ahetuka chittas to be neither kusala. Ahetuka chittas don't associate both kusala roots and akusala roots, but it doesn't mean there is this conditioning process, dissociating. It has this efficient course, but not concomitant hetus like lopadosa moha and alopadosa moha. But also you have to keep in mind, some texts talk about that ahetuka kusala chitta may associate hetus too at some point. But generally, in this process, we say that they are all ahetukas, but sometimes it may associate too. And then we talked about classification, what kind of ahetuka chittas. 15 out of 18, 15 ahetuka vipakas, akusala vipaka 7, kusala vipaka 8, and there are 3 kriya chittas, and these are the akusala 7 akusala ahetuka akusala chittas. You can see that all those ahetuka akusala chittas are given after the panchadvara vajjana chitta. We call it vipancha vijnana for the first 5 chittas of both ahetuka akusala and ahetuka kusala chittas. And then you can see kusala ahetuka vipaka chitta, the same thing. The first 5 is same unless this sukha and dukkha element. In here also you can see that all these chittas start after panchadvara vajjana, which is part of kiriya chitta. There are 3 kiriya chittas. Kiriya means just functional, which has no other thing, just functional. So you can see panchadvara vajjana here, which is what happens before the cognitive process becomes a part of sensory consciousness. And see manodvara vajjana, it has 2 parts. One is the 17 moments chitta vithi, and the other part is when a thought directly impinges on the mind. Third one is hasatutpada, that means which is only for the noble Buddhas, Pacceka Buddhas and arahants, Sammasambuddhas, Pacceka Buddhas and arahants. And this is a chitta vithi, and we talk about all this. 17. These three are what happens all the time. Huh? Whenever you are opening up for the external world, when I listen to a song, when I see a movie and all that, then it will follow 17. Summary, I put only few things. Ahetuka chittas are rootless. They don't associate with any of the 6 roots. Lobha, dosa, moha, aloba, adosa, amoha. Each base respectively rises with their chittas and their respective roles, even though there is only one akusala vipaka, but even though it can operate from different objects, but there's one akusala vipaka. Could be one akusala vipaka. Number 2, vipaka chittas are the states of consciousness that arise in the future mind of a karma actual being too. Never know. Sometimes it could be something you did in this life. It shouldn't necessarily be something in the past life. Maybe the first part of your life in this life too. Also, sometimes past karmas in the present life can rise in the future too. Somebody continued. Number 3, ahetuka akusala vipaka only gives rise to rootless vipaka. But ahetuka kusala vipaka gives rise to the rootless and the root vipakas. I told you, sometimes even the kusala side also, kusala side of the ahetuka chitta seem to be rootless. It can be with roots too at some point. Number 4, the main difference between ahetuka akusala vipaka and ahetuka kusala vipaka is that the latter, body consciousness, is sukha, right? We know that in the akusala side it's dukkha, but here sukha, kusala side, and also the santirana part. That means the investigating when it goes to santirana level, santirana chitta. In the akusala part, it can become two. Sorry, kusala part, it can become two. In the akusala part, it's just one, upekka. Investigating consciousness is twofold in the kusala. When the object of santirana is good, it becomes somanasa. When it becomes neutral, it becomes upekka in the kusala chitta. But in the akusala one, it's only becomes neutral. Yeah, so that's all for the discussion today, and I'm happy that you've been learning all that. And I think now you know the role of Ahetuka chittas for our life. So next week we're going to be talking other things like kama avachara kusala chittas, vipaka chittas, and kriya. We call them kama soganas. Until that time, you have a good week. Stay safe because of the situation. Thank you so much. Have a good day.